All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And tonight, we're going to be diving into a little bit of some specific details concerning transhumanism. We're going to be looking at Max Moore's Extropianism, the transhumanist philosophy of Extropy. I know initially you guys are probably thinking, Extropy? What the heck are you talking? Don't you mean entropy? No. What we're going to be looking at tonight is Max Moore is one of the leading philosophers of the transhumanist movement. He was formerly the CEO of Alcor. It's arguably the leading cryonics institute in the world. That is in Arizona, in which they take people to temperatures around negative 190 plus Celsius, and they preserve tissues and bodies at incredibly low temperatures with the hope that in the future they will be able to resurrect said individuals. One of the noted backers and has already paid for his cryonics would be Bill Gates. And so tonight I wanted to introduce something that you guys probably never heard of. And so the concept of extropy is a sort of metaphorical opposition to entropy. Entropy generally characterized as a sort of chaos or a dynamic of decay. Extropy then is this philosophy, this worldview, arguably a post-secular religion, that you can have perpetual progress into the future. And so we're going to be looking at, I want to give you guys a little bit of the basics so you are going to be familiar with this philosophy, because I think, again, it's really ironic because I want to show you guys some of formerly the World Transhumanist Association was rebranded as Humanity Plus. And you look at their social media and stuff, they really get very, very little engagement. I think their YouTube channel doesn't even have 2,000 subscribers. But what's so interesting is the funding these people get, right? So, and this was something mentioned in Alex Jones's interview last night with Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you guys saw that. Certainly had some differences of opinion with Alex in regards to who's controlling Hollywood and stuff like that, but I'll leave that alone. But something I do agree with is he was talking about the sort of top echelon, the real billionaire elite, the managerial technocrats are very much interested in these transhumanist philosophies and their intentions. And so that's what's so ironic is when we look at transhumanism. Now, you guys, especially people following Dyer and various, you guys are familiar with it. You get it. But talking generally to people, they think these are crazy ideas. Like, what transhumanism? And obviously, this is something I'm paying a lot of attention to and writing my dissertation on right now. And so I wanted to present to you guys the opening chapter of the Transhumanist. This is basically sort of the text, sacred text, if you will, of the transhumanist movement. That's called the Transhumanist Reader. And it's got tons of articles from all these different advocates laying out life extension, cryonics, transhumanist art, all this different stuff. And the opening chapter is Max Moore highlighting, again, this philosophy of transhumanism, which is couched in his concept of extropianism. So I want to lay this out to you guys because these are technical specifics that a lot of people aren't going to be familiar with. But if you really want to sort of be on the cutting edge of what all this stuff is about, I think this is an important stream. I know it doesn't look like it's the most popular stream in the world, but despite that, it is important. So smash that like, guys, for everybody who's here. I'd greatly appreciate that. If you want to show some appreciation for the stream and the content, because we're going to be looking at this book, the opening chapter, kind of laying out what extropianism is, how it relates to the transhumanist ideology. Then we're going to be getting into YouTube videos, because I want you guys to see Max Moore and his articulation of his beliefs and what they're doing. As I said, his wife, and I'm going to introduce you to her here in a few, Natasha Vita-More, she was also a prominent transhumanist activist, really in the 80s. And she kind of delves in the world of like documentary filmmaking, transhumanist art, transhumanist advocate, and she's one of the leading spokespersons for the Humanity Plus movement. But we're going to be looking at YouTube videos, and Max Moore was over on Theo Vaughn's podcast. So this isn't entirely, occult stuff. These people are being invited on mainstream platforms, but I don't think Theo Vaughn is going to be up to speed on what exactly transhumanism is in the career of Max Moore. But we're going to watch a clip and where Max Moore is talking about the utilization of cryonics and what they do at his lab. And so his wife, Natasha Vita-More, when I told you guys before that she did an experiment where they trained a rat to solve a puzzle, a maze, if you will. They cryonically froze the rat and then brought the rat back, so a form of resurrection, if you will, and the rat was able to still know the puzzle that it was solved, or that it was taught to solve. So this is part of their continued belief on the future of cryonics. Now, when you go to the Wikipedia page, ironically, I was looking at it, and it's, again, in Wikipedia, we know that it's a CIA front, right? But it talks about cryonics as a pseudoscience. And yet again, some of the leading billionaires in the world have already paid for their preservation in these cryonic labs, specifically in regards with Max Moore. So we're going to be introducing extropianism, transhumanist philosophy. Then we're going to be just unpacking some of the movers and shakers. I would say some of the three prominent philosophers, if you've never heard of them, regarding transhumanism. Not that there aren't more. There's plenty of thinkers in this area, but we have somebody like Max Moore, who has a PhD in philosophy. And again, he works with the cryonics lab. Then we have a guy named Nick Bostrom over at Oxford. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's a Swedish philosopher and scholar, and he is another major advocate. I did a previous stream on the history of transhumanist thought. That was an academic article that he actually published. And then there's a guy who, kind of funny, his name's David Pearce, and he is also one of these highfalutin British intellectuals, and he promotes what's called negative utilitarianism, which is about the eradication of suffering. And now you would think this is actually pretty prominent in my dissertation, because I'm comparing theosis to the sort of ideals of transhumanism and the sort of divinization of humanity. That David Pearce is one of these vegans, and his negative utilitarianism, and this is sort of the ethic of transhumanism, that it's going to eradicate all suffering, not only in humanity, but he wants to reprogram even carnivorous species and the entire ecosystem so that it no longer eats each other. So nothing suffers, not even, little bunnies and squirrels, that all the animals are going to be reprogrammed. You think, you laugh now, but these people are taken very seriously. And that's what I think is so ironic about the transhumanist movement, is that the only people that really take it seriously are those who do sort of academic writings, whether it's critical scholarship of it, or those that are advocates of it. And then the immense amount of monies through the Rockefeller Foundation, or these various global elite groups, and then private individuals. And so it is fringe, but it's more important than I think most people recognize. Is it right around the corner? It's debatable. And we're going to be looking at their concepts of humanity, because part of transhumanist philosophy and extropianism is it really denies metaphysics. And it's going to be part of a tradition called critical rationalism, or what Max Moore argues for is pan-critical rationalism, which is basically a philosophical system first developed by Karl Popper, but it's a rejections of foundationalism, right? So anybody who's familiar with Dyer and his debates, anybody who's familiar with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias and his philosophical lectures, knows that foundationalism and justification, justifying how one comes to knowledge claims, is actually rejected by this particular worldview. So some critics have argued it's a form of relativism, but what it is, it's a sort of falsifiable philosophy of knowledge. And so knowledge is only things that can be falsified. And then those things that aren't falsified through the use of the scientific method and whatnot, we can come to knowledge claims of them. And then that is a form of objective knowledge. Now, again, it's rejection of metaphysics. And really, the closest thing to a sort of metaphysical philosophy in transhumanism has a lot of different proponents, but it'd be a sort of simulation theory if they accept that. Some people totally reject simulation theory, but some of them are, in fact, very supportive of simulation theory. You could kind of argue that is their metaphysical framework, but some of the central pillars of this extropian philosophy that we're getting ready to dive into is the idea of perpetual progress, that progress essentially can be endless, and that through the use of science and technology, we can progress and elevate humanity in what they claim to be make a more humane humanity. Well, what is the essence of humanity? Well, a lot of these people actually reject the idea of universal categories, and because of their evolutionary presuppositions, argue that humanity is really just some evolving thing, and there really is no there because all species and all things are constantly just changing. And to make any sort of universal claim about nature and essence, it's sort of mistaken, right? These are antiques in the world of intellectual ideology. So therefore, all this stuff is changing, and if whether we then add, up what they believe, you're going to upload your brain into maybe a robotic humanoid, well, that's of course possible, because due to their functionalist understanding of mind, that all you are is your brain patterns. And so once they're able to map your brain entirely, you most likely through, again, utilization of artificial technology and all these different things, artificial intelligence, rather, I should say, artificial intelligence, advanced AI, they're going to be able to do these things. So perpetual progress, self-transformation. This is where I've highlighted that the transhumanist movement is part and parcel, obviously, whether you support it or not, but the trans gender movement is really under the umbrella of the transhumanist movement, because it's all about sort of self definition, and that you get to transform yourself any way in which makes you feel better, because again, there's no essence, and therefore there is no real thing called male and female. Yes, there's XX and XY chromosomes, but then gender is just a performative ideology that one wants to express themselves as. So self-transformation is another central pillar to extropianism. Perpetual progress, self-transformation, what they call practical optimism, that you should be really optimistic about the future because look at all the technologies we have before us. Intelligent technology, the idea that intelligence is not localized within, again, humanity, that our ability to reason and deduce, our ability to participate as an Orthodox Christian in these uncreated energies, these higher order behaviors that differentiate us from animals, love, truth, mercy, compassion, that these actually don't really exist. They're all sort of social constructions. And so intelligent technology, they believe that technology can absolutely become intelligent, can absolutely become more intelligent than us. Many would argue it's already there. And therefore, having a sort of technocratic world where there is no more suffering, right? Which is interesting because from a Christian perspective, suffering is really essential to self-growth, to self-knowledge, to learning about the world. But of course, these people actually reject that suffering is something that should be part of the human experience, and they want to eradicate suffering. So then, a la your Coom pod, right? You got your VR headset on. You've probably been programmed through nanotechnology, nanochips in your brain, that you actually can no longer experience suffering. And to me, this is almost it's like the kid or a person who can't feel pain, and yet they're putting their hand over a flame and they're burning their skin. I think the same thing is true in regards to the soul for somebody who doesn't experience suffering. If you don't experience suffering, I think in a way it's going to damage. Obviously, we're coming from a spiritual standpoint that these people reject, but it's going to destroy the image of God within you. Of course, that they reject all this stuff, but they also promote open societies. So, a la George Soros's open society, they want a more inclusive, diverse society. They look for self-direction and they promote what they call rational thinking. And so the rational thinking is really interesting because this played a really prominent role in our book review I did last night with Baselit Analyzer. We looked at the famous Russian novel The Master and Margarita. If you haven't read that book, we do recommend it. But I'll be premiering that stream tomorrow over here on this YouTube channel. But in the book, the devil, Satan, Wolin, visits Moscow, Russia at the height of the Stalinist period in 1946. And Bulgakov, in his book, is trying to make a critique of Soviet society and demonstrating that their rejection to the existence of good and evil actually blinds them. So it's a massive critique of like pure rationalism, which, again, anybody familiar with the history of science knows that Kant, in his critique of pure rationalism, has already undermined that entire project as regarding total knowability. And that's why they move into Karl Popper's critical rationalism. So therefore, they don't really have to justify the existence of knowledge. They don't really have to give a foundation to their worldview, because according to critical rationalism, as long as it's falsifiable and you deem it through experiment that it is proven not to be false, well, now we have objective knowledge claims. But it sort of begs the question, the logical categories used to do scientific experiments, language itself, number theory, all these different things. But again, in their worldview, we don't need to justify all that stuff. So they outright reject justification. So their metaphysics denies it or applies a sort of simulation theory. Their ethics is typically very utilitarian because the other ones are not going to be able to give universal claims for outside of social constructions. And specifically, it's called negative utilitarianism, where it's the sole focus is on the eradication of suffering, as opposed to pleasure and suffering being sort of oppositions to each other. Typical utilitarianism, and therefore you promote more pleasure for the most amount, or limit the suffering. Well, negative utilitarianism, and that's where we're going to see this guy David Pierce, who, like I said, wants to reprogram nature itself so it no longer suffers and it no longer preys upon itself or animals. I was thinking like lions in Africa. He wants to reprogram lions through, again, these advanced technologies where they'll no longer hurt other animals, all the ungulates. And then its epistemology is critical rationalism. So we're going to be diving into all this stuff in just a moment. Guys, smash that like. And if anybody wants to support the stream, which I would greatly be appreciative of, please do so using Streamlabs or the Dono chat link. Both of those are in the video description, or use YouTube right here. And I will present all the YouTube comments here on screen. First thing to do a little bit of shilling, if you will, is I want to remind you guys that the best thing to support my work, the best thing you could do is go over to the website and become a website member. We got 3 different types of memberships. We have a premium members meeting coming this Wednesday night, which is a private Zoom meeting with like-minded individuals from around the world. And if that's something that you would like to participate in, I would greatly invite you to join it. It's a great group. We have phenomenal conversations about a variety of different topics. You can do so with that link right there. And if anybody wants to sign up for a one-on-one session, let me go back here. There we go. If anybody wants to sign up for a one-on-one session, we can dive into any topic of your heart's desire for as long of an extended period of time as you would like by purchasing a session right there. You can pay with Stripe, use your credit card or a debit card, PayPal, or if you need another method, we can work something out. Just email me. Also, if anybody wants to sponsor a stream, we got 3 sponsored streams coming up here in the near future. I'm going to be working on those next week. They should be a lot of fun. If you have a topic that you would like to sponsor, you can do so with this link right here. I'd be greatly appreciative of that as well. And also, don't forget, if anybody wants to support by going over to the shop, we got exclusive COTEL crew clothing. We got a variety of different things, or you can actually go over to the YouTube channel, and we have this stuff now on the store. So you can check it out there and get something that you'd like. I would appreciate that. It's a way to support the channel. Get yourself a sweatshirt. Winter is coming. Make it a nice little Christmas gift for somebody you care about. So anyways, that concludes that. Also, I want to let you guys know that if you are in the market for any Orthodox stuff, feel free to go over to orthodoxdepot.com. This is a great American company here in the Midwest. It's a Orthodox run company run by Orthodox Christians. You can use promo code COTEL, COTEL, and get 10% off all products. And that helps me out, helps you out. You can get prayer ropes, candles, icons, necklaces, all types of stuff over at orthodoxdepot.com. So thank you guys for that. Okay, so now, in regards to today's topic, I want to discuss a little bit about transhumanism. And so this is one of the things that I thought is interesting. As I said, these these movements like transhumanism has incredible funding, and yet you go to their social medias, like the Humanity Plus, which is the official global organization for transhumanists. It's less than 2,000, not even 1.5 thousand subscribers. Weird, because at the same time it looks insignificant, and yet it's incredibly significant by those who actually wield power in our society. This is the gentleman we're going to be looking at today, Max More. And Max More, he is a philosopher and futurist who writes, speaks, and consults on advanced decision making about emerging technologies. He is the current ambassador and president emeritus after serving almost 9.5 years as president and CEO of Alcor Life Extension Foundation. Now you're thinking, Alcor Life Extension Foundation, that's what this is. And this is the institute that sort of cryonically preserves people. Like I said, Bill Gates, I believe he already has his purchased, so that what they do, and we're going to be watching a video here with Theo Vaughn where he describes it in more detail, is basically right at the moment of potential death, what they do is they take your body and they sort of preserve you by extremely, extremely low temperatures. Like if you go look at cryonics, it's usually at 196 degrees Celsius or below. This is very, very low temperatures. Now you look at the Wikipedia, which again, as I said, I know it's a CIA front. My point is just, it's interesting here that it views it as a pseudoscience, and that cryonics is regarded with skepticism by the mainstream scientific community. Yet, as I said, the people that have the money, the people that are in the know, they obviously participate in this. And so cryonics procedures can be only after the patients are clinically or legally dead. So I'm talking seconds after somebody is dead, they put them in these cryonic preservation sort of boxes, if you will. Cryonics procedures may begin within minutes of death. And we're going to be listening to him talk a little bit about this. We don't need to get into too many details right now. So what is extropian philosophy? We need to get into this. And so the opening chapter of the Transhumanist Reader, as I said, is if you're interested, this is sort of the book to have, because this is really the sort of steelman arguments. All the transhumanist advocates, they have articles in this book. Max More and his wife, Natasha Beta More, who are the editors of this book, are always telling people, well, if you want to know what we believe, you need to go get the Transhumanist Reader. And so the first chapter is, of course, Max More laying out the philosophy of transhumanism. And so he says, he defines it as a philosophy of life, such as extropian perspectives that seek the continuation and acceleration of the evolution of intelligent life beyond its currently human form and human limitation by means of science and technology, guided by life-promoting principles and values. So I love how, as we look into this stuff, they always use this rhetoric do I have the Humanity Plus website up? I need to pull that up. The Humanity Plus website. Oh, here we go. Let me pull this back up real quick for you guys. Okay, so this was their YouTube channel. And if you go back to their website right here, come on. There we go. Elevating the human condition, advocating for a more humane humanity. And we see a man fist bumping a robot. Interesting that it's through these technologies that make us more human. right? And so advocating or finding a balance between opportunity and risk, seeking solutions to world problems, advancing science and technology for a better and more beneficial future. Get involved now. And so you see the Humanity Plus Summit. These people get asked to speak all over the world. Here's a series of videos to their YouTube channel. And then get knowledge, be informed. The Center for Transhumanist Studies, which is basically an online course that is not a university degree, but Natasha Vita Moore, Max Moore's wife, who this is her right here. She's 9 years older. She's 73 years old, and she is a strategic designer, author, speaker, and innovator within the scientific and technological framework of human enhancement and life extension. Her interest is located within the ethical uses of science and technology and socio-political implications of revolutionary advances impacting humanity's future. So anyway, you get the idea here. So I wanted to highlight what Max Moore says then about what the philosophy of transhumanism is. And I don't mean to, I'm not going to belabor the point here. I just, as you can see, I got some stuff that's underlined. I think it's important. And so it's going to give you a perspective on how they define their movement, philosophically speaking. And so he says that becoming post-human and post-humanism, as I told you guys before, there's sort of a few different schools within the post-human train of thought. You have the radical post-humans, which are the people who believe, again, we need to get rid of people on the planet. We need to depopulate, that we need to change the central focus of philosophy and knowledge. So from the Enlightenment moving forward, it's always been humanity or man as the central focus of knowledge and of study. Well, post-humanism is another post-turn. It's a new turn in philosophy where we begin to think about the future as a post-human future, of which they then elevate animals and the planet to be now the main focus of knowledge and philosophical inquiry, where the transhumanists are actually in a different school. And he's going to make this clear as we move through this opening chapter here, which will just take a few minutes. He says, well, really what we're doing, we are the continuation of the Enlightenment project. And so the transhumanists are post-human, but they view themselves as still focusing on humanity as the central pillar of knowledge, right? So again, transhumanism is about dealing with the human condition, alleviating suffering, elevating people into a point where, and this is something that comes up with Max Moore and his wife, Natasha Vita Moore, as they say, oh, well, people want to say that we're pursuing immortality. And that's ridiculous because the sun has a lifespan. There's a definite end to the universe itself. So immortality, that's ridiculous. And, to give credit, yeah, okay, I get your point. But what they want is an unlimited longevity. So they want you to be able to live as long as you would like, and then you can terminate yourself whenever you decide to, or you can shift into a new ontological way of being. So he says, becoming post-human means exceeding the limitations that define the less desirable aspects of the human condition. Post-human beings would no longer suffer from disease, aging, and inevitable death. They would have vastly greater physical capability and freedom of form, often referred to as morphological freedom. And this is why the transhumanist movement is part and parcel tied with the advocacy for transgenderism, because this is morphological freedom, right? And the idea that we should be able to do this, I don't know where these people stand in regards to children, which is being promoted in various aspects in our society, but this is part of your morphological freedom, and they're then advocating for the advancement of your human rights because now you can morph yourself in accordance to your will. Post-humans would also have a much greater cognitive capabilities and more refined emotions. They'd be more joyful, less angerful, and whatever changes each individual prefers, right? So it's technology and science is allowing you to build your preferences. Again, as a Christian perspective, this is so catastrophic to the human condition because it's actually by me dealing with things that aren't my preference or what allows me to grow, and orthodoxy specifically places suffering as a point in which we can become more human. Christ on the cross is a signifier of that, right? So Transhumanists typically look to expand the range of possible future environments for post-human life, including space colonization and the creation of rich virtual worlds. The first fully developed transhumanist philosophy was defined by the principles of extropy, the first version of which was published in 1990. The concept of extropy was used to encapsulate the core values and goals of transhumanism, extropianism. That's why I wanted to do this stream, because how many people have ever heard of extropianism, and yet they're laying out how this is actually the central pillar of their sort of transhumanist worldview. Intended not as a technical term, as I said, opposed to entropy, but instead a metaphor. Extropy was defined as the extent of a living organizational system's intelligence, functional order, vitality, and capacity and drive for improvement. So as opposed to entropy is chaotic and degrades things. Extropy is this philosophy then about continually building, right? It's about creating more order, creating life extension technologies. And so he says here that although the principles of extropy define a specific form of transhumanism, that document is both the first comprehensive and explicit statement of transhumanism and embodies several crucial elements shared by all extant forms of transhumanism. The 2003 version included the principles of perpetual progress, self-transformation, practical optimism, intelligent technology, open societies, self-direction, and rational thinking. Perpetual progress is a strong statement of the transhumanist commitment to seek more intelligence, wisdom, and effectiveness, an open-ended lifespan, and the removal of political, cultural, biological, and psychological limits to continuing development. Perpetually overcoming constraints on our progress and possibilities as individuals and organizations, and as a species, growing in a healthy direction without bound. Okay. So we've kind of seen how he's self-defined it, and now we're going to get into a little bit of the specifics of their philosophy before we watch some of these videos. And so he says, it would not be accurate to speak of a universally accepted transhumanist epistemology and a framework for knowledge, if that is taken to mean a detailed theory of the acquisition and validation of knowledge. However, transhumanists over the last almost quarter century have practically always identified themselves as strong rationalists. A healthy legacy of the humanist roots of transhumanism is its commitment to the scientific method, to critical thinking, and openness of revision of beliefs. A remarkably large number of transhumanists are preoccupied with understanding and attempting to avoid the cognitive biases and deficient cognitive shortcuts to which the human brain is inherently vulnerable. So again, the idea that you need an updated brain, you need a computer inside your head. And so that's point there, though, highlights that transhumanism, unlike some of the other post-humans or post-humanists, they still want humanity to be the central focus of the philosophical project and the scientific project. And that's why he says that you can understand transhumanism as transhumanism, meaning the philosophy of humanism, or transhumanism, meaning then the ideology and the study of the transhuman. So they view themselves as the continuation of the humanist project coming out of the Enlightenment. Except for a widespread of commitment to rationalism and self-critical drive to overcome endemic human cognitive biases, transhumanist epistemological views range widely. Where these are explicitly stated, not all transhumanists delve into such recondite areas of philosophy, such as of Peircean pragmatism. So that's Charles Sanders Peirce, the American founder of the School of Pragmatism. Seems to be quite popular, while others may accept some form of externalism, explicitly or implicitly. And so externalism, if some of you guys saw the two gentlemen, the atheists that came on when Father Deacon Doctor was on, we did an open panel, Is Atheism the Dumbest Worldview? And we had two guys, and we'll give them credit. They were fairly sharp, and they were externalists. And so this is part of their worldview here. Another approach with substantial support, which I presented at the first conference organized by Extropy Institute, is pan-critical rationalism. So critical rationalism, founded by Karl Popper. This epistemology, based on the work of philosopher of science Karl Popper, differs radically from much Enlightenment epistemology. Many Enlightenment thinkers defended some sort of foundationalism, starting with Descartes' quest for utterly certain foundations of knowledge, which he located in his supposedly clear and distinct idea of God. Empiricists and idealists, other than Bishop Berkeley, usually left God out of the picture, yet still sought certain foundations in forms of unquestionable sense impressions and self-evident concepts or intellectual intuition. Critical rationalism, by contrast, rejects justification. You don't need to justify your knowledge claims, guys. We're beyond that now. We only just falsify knowledge claims. And so the view that beliefs must be justified by appeal to an authority of some kind, maybe like the laws of logic, in favor of the view that nothing is justified or beyond question. There are no foundations to knowledge. Acquiring and improving knowledge is based essentially on conjecture and criticism. According to critical rationalism, we can give up justification while retaining a respect for objectivity, argumentation, and the systematic use of reason. Despite the popularity of critical rationalism and its obviously close fit with the transhumanist drive toward continual improvement and challenging of limits, it must be acknowledged that there exists a small contingent of Ayn Rand-inspired transhumanists who remain committed to foundationalist epistemology. And then we just have a couple more things here, and then we'll move into some of the stuff I have for you guys. He says, any discussion of transhumanist concerns quickly raises multiple issues in the areas of metaphysics. Several of these revolve around the nature and identity of the self. Exactly. What is the self? What is the essence or nature to humanity when you're talking about uploading your brain, becoming a cyborg in various regards, totally altering it, what it means to be human? Well, they don't really have a strong answer to this. They believe in a sort of functionalism in which your brain has the functional patterns of every experience you've had since you were living. And if they can then map those connections, those neuronal connections, and place it in a computer program, well, that's basically just taking your brain from your head and moving it to the computer, and there you are. And it totally rejects, as a Christian, any concept of a soul, any essence to humanity that you actually can't get rid of. And that's what's so interesting generally about this project. And one of the things that I'll be highlighting in my dissertation in regards to comparing it to an Orthodox worldview is that they really don't have any there in regards to what humanity is. With few exceptions, transhumanists describe themselves as materialists, physicalist, or functionalist. As such, they believe that our thinking, feeling selves are essentially physical processes. And this gets into Yuval Noah Harari's, again, the book that I talked to you guys about, Homo Deus, where he puts forth the philosophy of dataism. And dataism is the idea that the only thing that exists is data processing. And therefore, what humanity or what all animals are just biological algorithms, because the only thing that exists is actually information. And therefore, the only thing that's important is dataism, the processing of information. And therefore, if a robot or an AI program can do that better than you, you're already out of date. And therefore, you need to be upgraded, in which he argues in the Homo Deus that I believe he says by 2040 or 2045, there will no longer be what he considered a purely biological human on the planet, because everybody will either have some type of upgrade, nanochip, some types of device that's going to, again, change you and alter you from your total biological self. While few transhumanists believe that the self is tied to the current human physical form, meaning that what exactly the self is, they can't define it, but they'll say it's not relegated to your biological body. But again, well, what is it? Well, we don't really know, but it's not limited to your biological body. Most accept some form of functionalism, meaning that the self has to be instantiated in some physical medium, but not necessarily one that is biologically human or biological at all. If one's biological neurons were gradually replaced, for example, with synthetic parts that supported the same level of cognitive function, the same mind and personality might persist despite being in a non-biological substrate. Now, how exactly would that work? So Your personality, who you are, is just your brain. It's just your brain functioning, right? This is essential to the transhumanist anthropology and as well as extropianism, because this is the central current. So, a functionalist holds that a particular mental state or cognitive system is independent of any specific physical instantiation, meaning, yeah, okay, maybe your mental state's right now tied to your brain, but you could have that mental state if it was just, silicon and a computer network. Well, I want to see that to be the case. They've yet to prove this, but this is their main thesis here. And so a functionalist holds that a particular mental state or cognitive system is independent of any specific physical instantiation, but must always be physically instantiated any time in some physical form. Functionalism is a form of physicalism that differs from both identity theory, meaning a mental state is identical to a specific brain state, and behaviorism, that mental terms are reduced to behavioral descriptions. According to functionalism, mental states, such as beliefs and desires, consist of their causal role. That is, mental states are causal relations to other mental states, sensory inputs, and behavioral outputs. And then the last section here that I want to highlight to you guys, he says one extension of functionalism is known in revisionary materialism, or its extreme eliminative materialism. Eliminativism is what she holds that the common sense view of the mind is false. You don't really have a mind, guys. You just have a brain state. You only have brain neuron firings. There's no such thing as a mind. Get out of here. He's called that folk psychology, the idea that you actually have a mind. And that the idea is that some of our common psychological concepts, such as belief, desire, or intentions, are so poorly defined that they will be found to lack any coherent neurological basis in the future, just as the concept of caloric was thrown out completely in favor of a thermodynamic conception of heat. Revisionary materialism, or what could equally be well called revisionary functionalism, takes the intermediate position that mental states can be reducible to physical phenomenon, but only after some significant changes and refinements are made to the folk psychological concept of mind. Okay, interesting there. And so, an obvious metaphysical question to raise is the compatibility of otherwise religion and transhumanism. And so, one of the things that Natasha Vita-Moore, Max Moore's wife, if again, I've been watching some of her stuff online, her interviews, she always highlights, interesting enough, and he's going to say it right here, Christian transhumanists, while not completely unknown, are very rare. Yes, because some of the biggest religious critics of transhumanism are typically Christians. Why would that be? Well, it's because of incarnational theology. It's because God became man, which is, again, my dissertation where I'm comparing Orthodox theosis to transhumanism. He sanctified biology. And so it's through biology, it's even through suffering, these things, what they want to eliminate, which make us more human and allow us to elevate and become more like God. So Christians have been some of the most vocal religious critics of transhumanism, whereas he highlights several transhumanists describe themselves as Buddhists. And there are a few obstacles regarding transhumanism and liberal Judaism. And he highlights that Mormons had the first religious transhumanist organization. And so it's Eastern mysticism. I've even seen some advocates recently in my research in the Islamic world that Islam, and I'm sure it's not for all people, but Islam and some of the Islamic philosophers in various universities in the Middle East, they're kind of in favor of transhumanism. And so it's interesting. Again, they highlight that Christians tend to be the most critical. And I can't help but think that has to do with our understanding of who Christ is in the incarnation of God. But Natasha Vita-Moore, she always talks about, well, transhumanism isn't a religion. Transhumanism is open to anybody. So it doesn't matter what your religion is. You can use your religion, again, although they're atheists and they reject the utilization of a religion as a useful thing, but they can say, well, you could be religious, and you could incorporate transhumanism as part of your spiritual framework and your understanding of what humanity is to become, you see. And so I don't have her videos queued up today, but we could watch those if you guys want. Send in a super chat. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Oh, we got a super chat that just came in. Major super chat. Oh my gosh. Thank you so to my friend and member Bone Man 538 throws in $151 here. Let me see. And so have that come up here on the screen. Come on. Geez, why isn't that not popping up? It should pop up. Maybe it will here in a second. Boneman538, thank you so much, brother. He throws in $151. Thank you very, very much, Boneman538. He says, do you think transhumanism utilizes entropy or extropy claims to self-appoint via science their light and love paradigm, allowing self-deletion or kumpods to extract the warmth or inheritance of Christ? Thoughts on alpha decay cancer research? Yeah, so their whole idea is that they're fighting against entropy. This is a great question. Thank you again, Bone Man, for all your support, brother. Thank you very, very much. And so there we go. There it pops up. Thank you so much, Bone Man 538. God bless you, bro. Yeah, so their whole premise is that they're fighting against entropy, right? So extropy is building these technological advances, science. And so it is a sort of necessity of science and technology to save you from the detriments of your biological self. And it is a sort of light and love paradigm. And when we get to this guy, I mean, this guy, he just kind of, I mean, he's a serious philosopher. His name's David Peirce, right? And so he's the one that promotes this negative utilitarianism. He's a co-founder of Humanity Plus, or was the World Transhumanist Association. He's the one that wants to, change the ecological structure so that there's no more suffering. And this is presented as why, like as you said, Bone Man, love and life, right? It's so presented as that they're so caring. They're so worried about humanity. They don't want anybody to die. They don't want anybody to suffer. And so his work, again, he wrote this famous book in 1995 called The Hedonistic Imperative, in which his hedonism is saying, well, what we need is, again, arguing that our post-human successors will rewrite the vertebrate genome, redesign the global ecosystem, and abolish suffering throughout the living world. You think not just human suffering, he means animal suffering. He means prey animals. They're going to redesign carnivorous apex predator species so that they no longer consume other animals, so that we can eliminate suffering from the world. And you're like, what? So Pierce's ideas inspired an abolitionist school of transhumanism, or hedonistic transhumanism, based on his idea of paradise engineering. And so he's saying, I want you guys to no longer suffer, and I want you to live in a world where you just get to pursue pleasure. This is the hedonistic imperative. He's arguing that it's an imperative to reshape our framework for society by eliminating suffering through various technologies. In a sense, now they always say you have an option. Like you don't have to choose these transhumanist tools, but this abolitionist project is based on the idea of paradise engineering, and his argument on the abolition of suffering, which he calls the abolitionist project, is a moral imperative. Now, again, these people don't even have a basis to argue for moral universals. Again, they use their utilitarian framework, and there's holes within that if you're going to, but that's why they're critical rationalists. So they don't have to justify their beliefs. They don't have to have foundations to their epistemology. They're critical rationalists. They're coming out of the school of Karl Popper. And so he is a vegan, as you would assume. Pierce argues that humans have a responsibility to not only avoid cruelty to animals within human society, but also to redesign the global ecosystem so that animals do not suffer in the wild. How, again, what type of person would even think that that would be possible or want to do that? He has argued in favor of a cross-species global analog to the welfare state, suggesting that humanity might eventually reprogram predators to limit predation, reducing the suffering of animals who are predated. fertility regulation could maintain herbivore populations at a sustainable levels, a more civilized and compassionate policy option than famine and predation and disease. The increasing number of vegans and vegetarians in the transhumanist movement has been attributed in part to Peirce's influence. And so, again, these people get great funding. These aren't, you would think, who takes this guy seriously? A lot of people, a lot of people. And I believe, where is he at right now? Let's see. Okay, I guess he's no longer in the university. He was at Oxford. And so now he's just working for his Humanity Plus and promoting his veganism and transhumanism. But I totally agree with what Bone Man had to say in regards that they are using the appoint via science, their light and love paradigm, allowing self-deletion and kumpods, right? And that's the interesting thing. If you actually go down the road that they're envisioning, the only way for you to die is to kill yourself. And so, as a Christian, you know, this is obviously sinful. This is something that we're going to normalize, and that the only way that you can die is not through God's will, not through natural decay, not through experiencing the aging process. You get to pick what age you want to be at, and they will then genetically alter and use various technological systems to maintain that you don't age, and you get to live as the hedonistic life that you always wanted to. And this is the future that we all want. Oh, you no longer want to ride the ride, you want to get off? Well, now you have to delete yourself. And so now you're morally culpable from a Christian perspective to get out of the paradigm that they've already put you in. And so again, you can't even go down it. But just wanted to throw that out there. But thank you so much, Bone Man brother. Really appreciate that. And Blue Skittle throws in $5 over on the dono chat and says, Bugs Lives Matter too. Eat the meat. Yeah, it's pretty sad. But thank you so much, Blue Skittle, for the super chat, brother, $5. And thank you, Bone Man 538. Really appreciate you. So with all that being said, guys, now I want to get into and allow you to hear Max Moore promote his worldview and hear it out of the horse's mouth, so to speak. So let me pull this up. And again, one of the other philosophers who honestly is much more sharp, I would say sharper, makes a little bit more sense. This is the gentleman, Nick Bostrom. So again, Max Moore, David Peirce, Nick Bostrom. I think Nick Bostrom's probably one of the stronger. And Max Moore, I would say, here's the thing about Max Moore when we watch his videos. He's the only one that actually looks somewhat like a Chad. He's the only one that actually lifts weights, takes care of his health, because it's part of his program for, again, life extension. But Nick Bostrom is a Swedish philosopher at the University of Oxford, known for his work on existential risk, anthropic principle, human enhancement ethics, whole brain emulation, superintelligence risk, and the reversal test. He is another co-founder of the Future of Humanity Institute at the Oxford University. And I have a book of his I just bought for my research called Human Enhancement. Human Enhancement. This is written by Nick Bostrom. It's edited. It's a collection of essays, but it's edited by Nick Bostrom. And he has articles in multiple books, including the Transhumanist Reader here, as I said, is sort of their ultimate book. He has articles in that. But without further ado, now I want to get into and introduce you to Max Moore, arguably one of the central leaders of the transhumanist movement. He is the founder of the Extropian philosophy that we've just articulated thus far. And he is married to Natasha Vita Moore. And this is an interview from 11 years ago talking about transhumanism and the singularity. So check this out. We'll move through it. Feel free to send in super chats on comments or anything, and we'll address those as we go through.
In transhumanism, for about as long as modern transhumanism has existed, there have been various precursors. It's hard to say exactly where things start, but back in 1990, I wrote an essay called Transhumanism Toward a Futurist Philosophy. And people had used the word transhuman before, but in the modern sense, nobody really created a philosophy of transhumanism. So I was really the first person to do that and developed what we call the principles of Extropy, which is a particular transhumanist philosophy. And I've had a very long interest in life extension, started practicing life extension and being intellectually interested in the idea since well before I stopped growing. In the my early 20s, I started the first cryonics organization in England, and I'm currently the president and CEO of the Alcohol Life Extension Foundation, which is the world's leading cryopreservation organization. The singularity to me seems to be a little bit too singular. It seems to assume that all these different technologies converge and take off all at the same pace. Whereas in my view, we're more likely to see a surge, which might tailor off, might slow down. In fact, it may be a series of surges. Information technology may improve at a different rate than biological technology, than nanotechnology, and so on. I don't think these all are necessarily coordinated. I can see the argument for that. If everything is driven by superintelligence, then perhaps that drives everything else. But I think that rather ignores economic and organizational factors and consumer adoption factors and so on. So I tend to think that what we'll see is the same as we've seen historically, but speeded up, which is that certain technologies will take off at a very accelerated pace, and it looks like we're hitting a singularity, but then they may actually slow down for a while, and then they may take off again, typical S-curve. And there may be a whole series of these rather than one singular event. I tend to think that the idea of a singularity is a little bit seductive. It's very appealing, and it has certain historical, religious, and mythical reverberations that I think kind of attract people to that idea. But I think it may be a more complex picture than that.
And I argue, or what I'm going to argue, is that the singularity, especially
by a surge, I'm really meaning that part of what's usually called the singularity, where we see
the singularity is basically another eschatological formation, right? So as Christianity believes in the second coming of Christ, for example, well, the transhumanists believe in this exponential growth that actually got going with conversations with a gentleman named John von Neumann. I don't know if you guys ever heard of him. I plan on doing a stream on who was John von Neumann, because he was huge in regards to the development of computer sciences. And he was actually the first one in the 1950s to sort of speculate about the exponential growth of technology. He worked on the Manhattan Project. And so he then speculated, this is in the mid 1950s, that technology is going to grow, and sort of postulated that there's going to be a point of exponential growth, the singularity, in which it'd be a runaway exponential curve in which we would be able to create a sort of utopian worldview. And this has been really promoted by somebody like Ray Kurzweil, who ironically keeps pushing back the singularity, right? I believe in one of his books, it was around the 2020s. Now I think he's pushed it back to like 2040, 2045, which is ironically where Yuval Noah Harari in Homo Deus talks about how we're not going to have any more biological humans, because everybody's going to have to be altered in one way or another to participate in the society of the future, a la the Great Reset. Okay, continuing on here, just wanted to throw that in.
See a rapid increase in the growth rate of a technology, a kind of exponential growth, but it kind of includes the idea, if it's a surge, that implies that it doesn't last forever. And it kind of gradually tails off, it flattens off. Whereas the singularity, if you look at the curves, they seem to be exponential until they become vertical, and you get an infinite rate of change in a finite amount of time. So the idea of a surge is that, yes, we do feel these sudden rushes forward, like with, for instance, aerospace technology. We got some very rapid advances from the Wright brothers onwards. There was rapid changes. And now it's pretty much slowed down, even though there was some continued progress in military aircraft. Still, we don't really see planes get any faster. We're not seeing Mach 20, Mach 50 planes. That's pretty much slowed down. So there you had a surge in the 20th century, and that's kind of petered out now. The Omega point idea, as developed by Frank Tipler, the physicist, does build on Teilhard de Chardin's idea of this idea of a kind of intellectual realm driven by computing power, very much on the lines of the singularity view, that reaches an infinite state where essentially every atom of matter in the universe eventually becomes part of a thinking device. And in Tipler's particular view, that seems to become a single mind. I don't know why, even if matter was replaced, well, it was converted entirely into thinking matter, I'm not sure why a single mind would be the result. But I think he's been driven again by the sort of Judeo-Christian tradition of a singular mind. And so in his view, we have almost infinite computing power, and that could in principle resurrect everybody who ever lived by simulating all possible people who ever existed. And in his idea, they would come back into the simulated reality, which would be much like a heaven.
And so Max Moore is talking, he brings up Pierre Desjardins and his sort of Omega point theory. Nick Bostrom has been quick the other philosopher from Oxford, he's been quick to dismiss this because of its religious spiritual sentiments and arguing that it's too mystical. So most of these guys do not have a generally mystical worldview. But here's the thing, and here's one of the tools that I'm using in my dissertation, is Jürgen Habermas, who, yes, he's part of the sort of critical school, critical theory, that type of stuff. But he has a theory that I'm going to be using called post-secularism, and the idea that in the post-secular turn, so we've, again, postmodernism, post-humanism, and then post-secularism is the idea that this distinction between the secular and the religious is broken down, which I agree with, right? I reject aspects of postmodernism and I reject post-humanism, but post-secularism does seem to be pretty evident in our society that whether we look at aspects of the BLM movement or social justice or various movements in our society that would be deemed secular take on what appears, in my mind, I'm sure you guys would agree, religious overtones. And so Habermas argues that in using a post-secular framework, and what I'm using is that transhumanism is a post-secular form and postmodern form of meaning making, and it does imbue itself with religious mystical rhetoric, even though these people reject that labeling wholeheartedly. They do not believe this to be a religion or a spiritual tradition or even mystical, even though other people like Yuval Noah Harari, if you read in that chapter in Homo Deus, he says Dataism is in fact a new religion that views the entire world as data in all things that can process data as various forms of algorithms. So some people are more explicit in transhumanism, or at least its ideology, its philosophy, sort of supplanting traditional religious yearnings. But you can see, again, the idea of self-divinization, theosis. You can see this idea of paradisal, utopian type thinking. Now, they would say, well, we don't want to build utopia because utopia is just no place and we want to be in a place. And so, but you get the point for the general meaning of utopia. I mean, David Peirce's whole negative utilitarian philosophy about is eradicating suffering, even in regard to predatory species. What? Super chat came in. Shout out to Kristen. She throws in $10 over on the dono chat, and she says, it's my firm belief that these Oxford types only write these goofy theories of the future science religion to perk the ears of higher pyramid Luciferians so they can join the ranks and kitty diddlers and government money thieves. Well, you're not wrong, because as I said, you look at transhumanists and these organizations and their social media, no interaction, very, very small followings. Now, generally speaking, the conversation regarding transhumanism is fairly popular, still not incredibly popular. But when you look at the global elites, and this is where I would agree with what Alex Jones thinks, that these global elites are in fact transhumanists. And that's where people and other scholars who have been very critical of transhumanism, and even Francis Fukuyama, the sort of neocon, was in the Bush administration. Francis Fukuyama wrote the book Our Post-Human Future, in which he criticizes transhumanism as another have and have nots. And so even though they use this rhetoric, they're going to eliminate suffering and they're going to build this beautiful future for you. Well, who gets the technology first? And who gets the technology first, they're going to dictate who then allows to get it. And this is a point where Natasha Vita-Moore, and maybe we'll pull up this interview because it's actually probably worth watching for today, but she is really reluctant to address this one because the whole idea, as Bone Man 538 said, it's this love and light sort of overtone of these philosophies. But imagine the people who are running, again, the Bilderbergs, the World Economic Forum, the Davos, that they're going to get these technologies before you do. Now, I also speculate that they're not going to work. So, Lord have mercy on those people. But if they have them, they're sure as hell not going to let the average person have it until they all die out, until they get down to their, 500 million in some of their white papers, they argue, less than 1 billion people on the planet. Now they're going to then force people to, again, as Yuval Noah Harari says, you're not going to be a fully biological entity by 2045. So just want to throw that in there. But thank you so much, Kristen. Okay, moving on.
So it seems very conveniently to fit the Judeo-Christian worldview. So I'm not sure it's going to happen that way at all. But I think in broad outlines, this general picture is kind of plausible. This idea that we will increasingly turn unthinking matter into thinking matter. And if you look long enough ahead, millions, billions, trillions of years into the future, it seems a fairly plausible picture of the general direction. The matter will essentially be turned into thinking matter, into consciousness. Not in any mystical sense.
Even though they can't define consciousness, right? This is called the hard problem in the philosophy of nine. Nobody is able to come up with a definitive theory, but of course, they also believe that the entire universe will become conscious and thinking by the utilization of their technologies.
Sense, simply that we'll be using lots and lots of matter for computing, which means our minds can be vastly greater, vastly more powerful. And the world will be unimaginably different. I think that people, when they look at the future, if they do accept this idea that there are going to be drastic changes and great advances, they will necessarily try to fit that very complex, impossible to really understand future into very familiar mental models, because they want to put things in boxes. They want to feel like they have some kind of grip on that. So I won't be surprised to see, Christian transhumanists and Mormon transhumanists and even Buddhist transhumanists and every other group will have some kind of set of these ideas. They will gradually accept them, but they'll make their future world fit with their pre-existing views as to how it will be. And I think that the essence of transhumanism is not religious. It's really based on humanism. It's an extension of humanism, hence transhumanism. It's really based on ideas of reason and progress and enlightenment and a kind of a secularism. But that doesn't mean it's incompatible with trying to mix certain of the transhumanist ideas of self-improvement, of enhancement. I think those are potentially compatible with at least non-fundamentalist forms of religion.
So we got a super chat that came in real quick. Major thank you to Amelia A. Strauss, throws in $10 and says, thank you for all you're doing. God bless you. Well, thank you so much for your $10 super chat. Thank you for supporting the channel. Guys, smash that like for everybody who's here. Please, appreciate that. And then if you're on YouTube, feel free to send in a super chat or some memberships. We could definitely use some more memberships. Please join the COTEL crew. You get access to exclusive emojis here on the YouTube channel. Would be very appreciative. But thank you, Amelia A. Strauss, for the super chat. God bless you as well. Okay, back to it. On becoming post-human, a threat to humanism. So now you're going to see where they're going to talk about how transhumanism is actually continuing the Enlightenment project of humanism and maintaining humanity as the central focus.
Back in, I think, 1993, I wrote an essay called On Becoming Post-Human. And I wrote that for Free Inquiry magazine, which is probably the premier humanist publication in the United States, the invitation of the editor. And that was a very interesting experience because he told me the response, first of all, it was a huge response. He got more letters responding to it than he had in any previous article. And he said they're pretty evenly divided, 50-50, but half of them said, this is really fascinating. I'd like to know more about this. It sounds like a good idea. And the other half thought this is a terrible idea because it was challenging humanism. It was challenging the idea that we should just be the best humans we can be, because we're saying we can become something more than human. So those people sort of clung on to the current idea of the human, whereas I think the other half understood that we're really building on humanism. And there is this tradition that humanism has the ideas of progress, of reason, of looking past all the artificial boundaries between us, the racial and gender boundaries and so on. It's all about improving everybody's condition. So I see transhumanism as a direct descendant of the Enlightenment humanist project of challenging every orthodox belief, challenging everything that we currently accept and saying, why can't we do better? And pushing that not just to improving society, just improving education, but asking fundamental questions. Why can't we improve human biology? Why can't we change our genome? Just because it's the way it is doesn't mean it's as good as it can be. Why do we age and die? Why can't we do something about that? So to me, transhumanism is the natural successor to humanism in a positive sense. People tend to make an apparently clear distinction between treating a disease or a dysfunction, therefore getting a cochlear implant or a new heart valve on the one hand, and enhancement on the other. A true enhancement would mean essentially becoming something better than you are or higher functioning, perhaps better than a human being is. But that distinction is really pretty blurry the more you look at it. And I think really it's a matter of habit and of what you're used to, because if you get a valve replacement, you're just getting back to a very familiar baseline, whereas a more radical enhancement is something new. However, I think what we'll see is that as these become available and tested and safe, the people will very quickly forget their objections. It'll be very much like, say, open heart surgery. When that was first introduced, most people, realize this now, but most people were horrified by the idea. I mean, not really surprisingly, if you think about it, we're talking about cutting your chest open and sticking your hands in there and moving things around and sewing things up. that actually is a fairly gruesome idea. But now we think, oh, okay, if I have to have it done, you know, not looking forward to it, but everybody does it. I think if we have life extension technologies, if we have cognitive upgrades, people will very quickly realize the benefits and advantages of those, and their apparent in-principle objections will very quickly disappear.
And I just want to highlight, this is one of the sort of tropes that you hear when you read transhumanist literature, is that, well, look, we already have you know, the advancing of human capabilities. Look at your bifocal glasses. It's like, wait. Bifocal glasses is a long stretch to computer brains, uploading your mind, becoming a cyborg, creating just like oh, the movie that I just watched, it, the one where the AI female, what is it? Where she you know, they get the programmer to fall in love with her, and then she is able to escape. Somebody's gonna know in the chat. It's freaking mind fart right now. No, not Transcendence. It's the one where not her. Somebody will say it. It was very popular. It was like 2014. Yeah, Deus Ex. Yep, that's it. That's it. Where, you know, the whole point. Yep. That they are going to equate this as humanity, right? Because there is no human essence, and therefore the AI humanoid is going to be on the same level as you. And it's like, well, how does exactly that work? What exactly are human rights? What exactly the elimination of suffering? And, you know, these things aren't exactly clear.
It's certainly true that we've always extended ourselves physically and cognitively. We've used external calculating device like the abacus, you know, for a long time. We've used various kinds of artificial teeth actually for many centuries. So yeah, and stones obviously to increase our ability to cut and to stab and to build things. So yes, we've extended the body and the mind for many, many years. I don't really call that transhuman. I tend to reserve that term for something that really makes a fundamental change in the human condition.
And this is where I would agree with Max more. Now, again, you go through some of this, other people would say, well, all tool use is transhuman because it's advancing human capabilities through the utilization of man-made technologies. And I agree with him. Well, there's a bit of a difference between your bifocal glasses and the transhumanist movement.
And by the human condition, if that's not to be arbitrary, I think it has to mean defined by our genes, because that's what separates us from other species. So if our genes then lead to a certain kind of brain development, a certain ability in the range of visual acuity, of auditory perception, which are limited by the way our genes have built us, then when we start talking about directly altering those genes to give us abilities beyond that, or implanting devices, or doing some of the re-engineering of the human body or brain that allows us to have, you know, perceptual and cognitive and emotional ranges beyond that of any human being, then we can talk about transhuman. So wearing eye contact lenses doesn't really make you transhuman, but it's all part of the same process of augmenting ourselves. Yeah, the Humanity Plus conference, I talked about essential transhumanism. And the reason I chose that was that this was the first transhumanist conference in Asia. And it seemed to me many people may not have a clear idea of what
Yeah, I believe the movie was Ex Machina, not Deus Ex. It's Ex Machina. Yeah. So thank you so much, struggling at home, for your help. That's the movie that I had in mind, is Ex Machina.
Humanism is. They'd heard many talks about various particular aspects, certain technologies, whether it's robotics or AI or biotechnology, but they may be wondering, well, how does this all fit together? What exactly is transhumanism? And since transhumanism, modern transhumanism started in the late 80s onward, it's really flowered and grown and developed in all kinds of many different directions. And so it can be confusing to actually isolate what is the core of that. So I was trying to get to that. I was pointing out how certain ideas have been emphasized, perhaps overemphasized, and people were thinking that was transhumanism. But really, the core of transhumanism is the idea of using reason, science, and technology backed by goodwill to overcome fundamental human limits, to live longer than we've ever lived, to become smarter, to become emotionally better than we've ever been. That is the core of it. All the other things are details.
But how can you have emotional advancement if you also want to eliminate suffering? And this is a real philosophical problem for much of this movement, because is not suffering, is not anger, is not disappointment, is not being sad part of the human condition and what it means to be emotionally sensitive and emotionally aware? And the idea that we're going to eradicate these by localizing them in the brain and augmenting the brain structure, and this is going to be a utopian future, that sounds horrifying to me as a Christian. That sounds horrifying. Doesn't sound like a paradise to experience.
Particular technologies are not the essence of it. Maybe we'll use nanotechnology, maybe we'll use some other method, maybe we'll use biotechnology. So it's good to have arguments about which technology is most effective and most promising, but that's not the core of what defines transhumanism. It's defined by its values of progress and reason and optimism and not challenging limits, and by using and pursuing that relentlessly. That's really what transhumanism is, essentially. There are a certain number of objections that come up frequently, especially when we talk about life extension. There are typical ones about what about overpopulation, what about resources, won't I become bored, won't dictators stay on for billions of years ruling their countries. Other people complain that it's somehow unnatural, even though human nature has always been about modifying ourselves and changing ourselves. So certain standard objections come up, and to me they're all based on a combination of fear and lack of imagination. Essentially, what people usually do when they think about these distant scenarios, they tend to project how we are today into the future. So for one thing, you talk about life extension, bizarrely, they automatically think that we're talking about living older and getting older and older and more decrepit. And of course you would want to live like that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about living youthfully and vigorously, in fact, better than we've ever been. Well, they project other things remaining the same, not having any different technology, no better means of dealing with the environment. The fact is that we've had environmental crises throughout human history. Back in the early Industrial Revolution, the British were burning all the forests for wood. But does that mean there are no trees left on the planet now? No, because we go through cycles. We learn new technologies, new ways of producing energy, and the same way we will respond to those challenges. So I think what transhumanists are pretty good at is thinking along multiple tracks. They can think about multiple changes at a time, not just one single change. That's not the way the world works. So almost all these objections are based on this false idea that one thing will change and nothing else will. Well, they just can't imagine other possibilities. They can't imagine new technologies changing the rules, as they have always done and will continue to do so. One of the most attractive things about transhumanism, I think, is it's a very thoroughgoing philosophy of improvement. It's about self-improvement, it's about improving society, about improving the economy, about improving all our possibilities. So it's fundamentally a very progressive philosophy. It's very popular, especially among young people, to make a big deal of being an anti-racist and anti-sexist. Transhumanists find that a little bit of a yawner because, of course, that's very obvious. If we're talking about making radical alterations to ourselves, then differences in skin color and gender seem pretty trivial by comparison. So it's attractive because it really overcomes those other artificial distinctions and looks well beyond them to what can we individually and as a species do to vastly improve our condition. So it has a real visionary component. It's not just about what are the problems of today and tomorrow and even the next 5 years. It looks far beyond that. So that has to be attractive. It's bringing back a vision into society that's been lacking for some time. I think we've become so focused on short-term problems and complaining about how things are that we've lost a lot of that vision. In the Enlightenment, that was the thing. They came out of the Dark Ages when nothing much good had happened for 1,000 years. And so it was a very exciting view that, with scientific method, we can actually improve life. And that's got a little bit forgotten in recent years. So transhumanism, I think, offers a new positive but science and reality-based way of approaching an improved human future. I think there are multiple causes of short-term thinking. One of them is fundamental probably to the human constitution and something we'll have to overcome by making those fundamental changes, which is that our brains evolved to make short-term decisions. In the early days, for most of human history, we didn't live very long. We lived 20, 30 years if you're lucky, and then you got killed by a tiger, or you starved to death, or you caught a disease, or you fell off a cliff. So our brains evolved to make very short-term decisions. I'm facing a tiger, should I run this way or that way? Or should I duck down or run up a tree? We didn't have agriculture even, so they didn't have to think really a year ahead. You looked about the next chase and finding a warm cave. So it was very, very short-term thinking, and that's how you survived. We now live in a very complex technological society with lots of interdependencies, and we live a lot longer than we did, and we can expect that to continue. So the brain is just fundamentally not well suited to long-term thinking, which is why I think we won't have fundamental solutions to these problems until we change the human constitution itself. On top of that, of course, you have all kinds of institutional imperatives. You have people who need to make short-term profits to satisfy their shareholders, and that tends to make us think short-term. You have politicians who want to get re-elected in 2 or 3 or 4 years, and so they think about maximizing the benefits that they apparently produce in those few years, and it doesn't matter what the long-term consequences are. So they may be quite willing to hand out lots of money to people, not thinking about the long-term debt they're producing. So these are some of the, I think, several factors that lead us to short-term thinking. So transhumanists are somewhat unique in really stretching out that thinking horizon. How can we think several decades or even centuries ahead? And that takes a lot of mental energy to do, because you don't really know how things are going to work out. You can only look at general trajectories and trends. But by imagining those possibilities, of course, you create those possibilities. If you never think about the long term, you'll never really head in that direction. You'll just be bumped around by the current forces.
And so I'm going to play 2 more sections and then we'll move on does technology cause dehumanization, and then his section on cryonics, because that's where we're going to go next, is his interview with Theo Von here.
Do they
talking about what cryonics does and how they actually do it in their lab. So hold with me. We're going to get through this, but 2 more sections.
I think the idea that technology causes dehumanization is actually the reverse of the truth. Now, certainly some technologies can be abused. I think people who lock themselves in front of a screen and play the same video game for 18 hours every day, that may be dehumanizing because it's narrowing them down. It's narrowing their relationships. They don't interact with other people, and they don't have a wide range of activities. So you can abuse it. But in general, it seems to me that if you're at the mercy of nature, if you're stuck in one particular environment, you can't meet anybody else. You become very insular in your tribe, and everybody else is seen as an enemy. You become very narrow in your thinking. the long run of technological progress and of economic development means that we can afford to be generous. We can afford to treat people outside our immediate tribe as part of the same community. The level of violence has declined, as a number of recent books have been arguing. If you look at the actual trends, violence has massively declined over the last few centuries as we become wealthier and smarter and more civilized. So yes, somehow it's always the very latest technology that's dehumanizing. So I think, in another 50 years, people will look at genetic engineering and, oh, no, that's fine, but there'll be some other technology that's dehumanizing. So it's really a matter of the unfamiliarity combined with the unfortunate tendency of science fiction, especially in movies, to always portray dystopias, these dehumanized futures, just because that's lazy and easy to portray. It's much harder to portray a future where technology has mostly beneficial effects. It's much easier to show producing these robotic cyborgs that will go around trying to kill the rest of humanity. So unfortunately, that feeds that kind of view of dehumanization of technology. Cryonics is essentially the practice of, at the point of legal or clinical death, which is not the same as biological information death, preserving somebody and taking them down to a very low temperature and minimizing freezing damage, with the idea being that our current criteria for death is historically transitory. Just as people died 50 years ago, but now we could bring them back with better technology. In the future, people who died today of cancer or heart disease or aging itself could be revived. So what we do is we preserve people in an unchanging state so that they can go to a future time where we have much more advanced medical technology and they can have a second chance.
Okay. So, well, this is related.
This appeals to people who enjoy living and don't see any reason why they should give up on it just because their heart gives out or cancer decides to kill them or aging gets them. That's a very arbitrary thing. They want to choose how long they live. So the idea is they will come back, not as an old person, not as somebody with that disease, but as someone rejuvenated and at the peak of fitness they've ever enjoyed. So why wouldn't they want to come back? As long as you enjoy living, it seems like you want more of it. And if you can be back in a healthy young body, but with the wisdom of the age you've accumulated, you've got a pretty good advantage there for a second life.
Okay, so now we're going to get into his actual description of how they utilize cryonics, because as I said, this is a huge business. And many of the global elite have already signed up that before they actually are getting ready to die, they want to be cryonically preserved in the hope and what they believe is an expectation and a sure fact that technology is eventually going to be able to reanimate them. And again, in my dissertation regarding orthodoxy and transhumanism, I'm going to highlight how this is a sort of technological resurrection that they basically want to do. And so even though he talks about wanting to get away from the Christian worldview and Christianity, so much of transhumanism is sort of Gnostic Christianity that's totally relegated to secular rhetoric and science and technology. But here's his appearance on Theo Von. This is just a clip on him talking about cryonics.
Do they ever come back to life in that
No,
moment?
that's a very important point, though, because that could happen. You're quite right to think about that. That is possible, theoretically. Again, because just because they call you legally dead doesn't mean everything is stopped. The point when your body gives out, I don't want to call die because that's not really what's happening. We'll get into that as to are you actually dead or not, because I don't think you are. But your body gives out, your heart fails, whatever, something critical goes. In an ideal situation, we're right there at the bedside, and we can begin within seconds of legal death being pronounced.
And do you have to wait for someone to be there? Like, does a coroner have to show up, or like at least a kind of smart policeman or something to say, hey, yeah, you guys are good to get in there, they're dead?
Generally, no. We hate those cases when you have coroners or medical examiners. In most cases, you just wait for a doctor to declare legal death. I think in some cases it can be a special kind of nurse, but legal death has to be declared, and it's very important to understand how that's different from other things. But coroners or medical examiners, that's a disaster when they get involved, because you have to wait for them to arrive, which could be an hour or more.
And they're slow. So, I mean, they're dawdling.
They take their time.
Yeah.
And they're like gods. They have complete power. It doesn't matter if you have a religious objection; they can do it anyway, and they often will. And that can be a disaster. That can be as bad as taking the brain out of your head, slicing it into pieces, and then shoving it back into your stomach, which is as nasty as it sounds.
Oh.
It doesn't have to be that bad. We've had a lot of success basically they will autopsy you. If you're driving a car, you have an accident, they're going to autopsy you.
Okay. Hold on, slow it down a little bit for me so I can pay. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm. So you're okay. So you have. So the coroners and those kind of guys can be a hindrance. It can be a holdup.
Yeah.
So you want to be already involved with the presumed patient that you're going to freeze. You want to be already involved with them, and hopefully there's like a medical. They're at the end of their life with a doctor, or they're in hospice or something.
In hospital or hospice. Yeah.
Someone can
pronounce
them legally dead, and then you guys can be there.
Right.
And right then you guys start. What do you do? Do you give them a couple minutes to kind of be with the Lord or whatever? Or do you just get right in there?
We get right in there.
Wow.
I mean, ideally, I mean, we're not always able to get there before legal death is pronounced. We want to get there as quick as we can. It's not essential, but it's certainly better. So ideally, we're at the bedside. The doctor says, I declare you legally dead.
Okay.
And let's just go into that for a second before we go into the procedure, because it's really important. When they say, I declare you legally dead, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean your whole body's dead? All your cells are dead? No, it can't mean that, because people donate their organs all the time, right? So all these things are still alive. Just something critical has failed. And in fact, many times when you're declared legally dead, they could actually resuscitate you. That's why people have DNR, do not resuscitate orders, because they're saying, please don't resuscitate me, because I'm just going to be miserable and horrible for a couple of hours and then fail again, right?
Wow.
So it's very important to understand that legal death is not the same as everything suddenly dying. That doesn't happen.
I see. So it just has to be legally dead, and then there's still a lot of life going on inside of people.
Yeah. So
and that's when you guys get in.
That's when we get in there, and what we do, I'll try and keep it relatively simple because it's a complex procedure. Basically, we'll take the patient, move them from the hospital bed or the hospice bed into an ice bath. We'll cover them with ice, add some water. We have a device which circulates that icy slurry around them to accelerate the cooling process.
And what temperature is that you put them in?
Well, it's just ice water. So we don't want to go below freezing at this point, because that would damage the cells. We haven't protected them yet. So we're going to put icy water that starts circulating. We'll put on a mechanical CPR device to start pumping on their chest, and a respirator to take over breathing. So we're actually restarting circulation and respiration. You might say, well, why are you doing that? This person's dead. Well, as we said, they're not really dead in any interesting sense. And we have to preserve the viability of the tissues. Just like someone donating an organ or a kidney, we want to keep it viable. You have to keep it viable for several hours while you send it across country.
Yeah, when I was young, my sister got a liver transplant when I was younger, when we were kids. And she, I guess they had to move the organ pretty quick and then get it in her.
Yeah, they don't last that long.
Hope you enjoy.
So there's conversations that are much more in depth in regards to cryonics, and this is one of them. We're just going to watch a little bit. If you guys want, we can check out this one that I think is fairly interesting. This is his wife, Natasha Vita Moore. And you can see I've been watching much of her stuff. Here it is right here. Humanism and transhumanism. This is very interesting. Now, look, she is 73, and she's probably used a lot of things to preserve herself, because she hopes to be able to, or at least I know she signed up for the cryonic preservation, but she's hoping for, again, a radical extension of life through some of these technologies. So if you guys want, we can check this one out too. I just want to play a little bit of this one where he talks a little bit more about cryonics. But as I said, compared to some of these other transhumanists, Max Moore, you can tell he does lift a little bit of weight. In some of his, like if you go, let's see, Max Moore, he doesn't look like the rest of them. So like right here, this is a whole conference speaking on cryonics. You can tell he's working out. He's lifting weights. I'm sure he's on TRT, but that's part of him and his wife, Natasha Vita Moore, are very big proponents of fitness in regard to try to perpetuate one's health, and hoping, for example, Natasha, if we watch this video here, she hopes to be able to be biologically augmented and move into a new body. She wants to get a new body, a younger body. But here's Max talking about cryonics a little bit.
Very tough question. Depending on how we define death, there's, I think, a good definition of death, and then the answer is quite easy. No, it's not possible. By definition, I'll explain that. I think there's another definition, like when we're driving our car and it suddenly stops working and we say, oh, my car died. In that sense, clearly you don't dispose of the car. You get a new battery or you charge it up and it's alive again. So in that sense, clearly there is life after death. But I think that our concepts of death are not very well developed, and they've been very much based on historical circumstances. So a few decades ago, someone stopped breathing, their heart stopped beating. We said, they're dead. That was it. But now we don't do that. We might call them clinically dead temporarily, but we don't call that real death, and not even legally dead. What we do is we start doing CPR and defibrillation and so on, and they come back to life. So were they dead? Well, not in any real definite sense. Right. I think the same is true today with people that we call dead. What we're really saying is today's medicine can't make this person better. They can maybe revive them temporarily. But the information that's in their brain that stores their personality, that represents who they are, if that's still there, I don't think they're really dead in any final sense. But now if you talk about biological death, yes, you could have life after biological death. The body could die. if you could then transfer the patterns of the personality, everything that's stored in your the patterns of your brain, if you could somehow replicate that in a different substrate, then I think in that sense, life after death is a possibility.
Okay, so let's explore that. And this is uploading of our total being into another medium. And certainly, if you take all the information in our brains, 100 billion neurons, 10,000 connections each, the permutations, the synapses, whatever you want, the number is a fairly finite number, and by technological standards, it's huge, but it is not accessible as we look to the future. There certainly looks to be computing power that will vastly expand the totality of human brain. So it is conceivable, if you look at all the information in the brain, to upload that. I'm not saying in 10 years, some people would say 100 years, I might say 1,000 years or 10,000 years or 1,000,000 years. But if it's in principle possible, do you believe that it is in principle possible to really upload your Max's first person subjective experiences, certainly with your memories and personality, into a different medium?
I think it is. I'd be very surprised if it weren't. It would require that there be some essentially mystical property of the brain, some kind of magical property that we have no idea of. That,
a la the soul. Maybe the soul is something real, and that's what animates and gives personality to beings. And this idea that you're just going to be your neurons is totally misguided and is doomed to fail.
We can't somehow duplicate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even if there was a mysterious property that we haven't discovered yet, presumably, if it's still a physical property, we would eventually discover it. Maybe it's some kind of subtle magnetic particle or something. I don't know. But we could discover that and then replicate it. So that's not to say that any person, well, that begs the question. It's not to say that any being walking around talking like me, acting like me, would actually be me, because we have the Turing test, right, which I don't think is a very good test because it's on a behaviorist philosophy, and that's not adequate. So I think it would be possible to create something that spoke like me and appeared to be me, but inside was actually empty.
Right, and that's a philosophical zombie, as they said. It looks like it, and if I stick a pin in you, you'll say it hurts, and if I say you're a zombie, you'll say you're full of something, and maybe start to punch me or get angry because I'm accusing you of being a zombie, but in fact, you are a zombie inside.
But although philosophers like to talk about philosophical zombies, I think that'd actually be quite hard to construct. I think it'd be easier to create a new being on a new platform who actually was conscious, because you're probably going to have to really work hard around that for them not to be conscious. It's a lot easier to actually be conscious, to act like you're conscious.
Yeah, and certainly if consciousness is fully physical and you put all those physical elements together, even though we don't know what they are, and you put them together, then the natural consequence would be conscious. You'd have to somehow suppress it to make a zombie, and that might be impossible once you put the physical together. So let's say that you can upload it. It presents the very serious problem, I believe, of duplication. So if you can upload it once, you can upload it twice. If you can upload it twice, you can upload it an infinite number of times. So what's the difference between uploading me into another medium and taking a cell of mine and creating, making it a stem cell and creating a whole other person? That other person is my identical twin, but it is not me. It doesn't have my first person experience at all. Would the upload have a first person experience? And I really feel it's me enough to where I'd say, get rid of the old body. But even at the beginning, there'll be two of them because I've been uploaded. You wouldn't want to destroy the original before you had it working in the other medium. There are deep problems here.
Well, actually, in some proposals, like Hans Moravec actually does have the destructive scanning process where there is no overlap, because essentially you're shaving a layer of brain tissue away, writing a program that represents it. So you're actually getting rid of the original as you create the new one. But let's take a scenario.
You don't have to do
no,
that.
You don't have to. Let's take a scenario where you don't, where maybe you create 5 or 10 copies, whether you keep the original or not. Now, in some sense, you have to say, because of the transitivity of identity, that none of those people are you. They're not identical to you, because identity breaks down as a logical relation. But I agree with Parfit on this. Who cares? What I care about is surviving. I don't care about my identity surviving. I want to survive. So I don't care about a logical relationship. I care that my personality, my memories, my values, my goals continue. Now, if they continue on in 10 people, they still continued on. Now, there are real problems because, which one goes with my wife? Which one gets my job? Who gets the property? We're going to divide it up. So there'll be huge practical problems. But those might be solvable in some possible future.
Well, there is a difference, though, between your memories, your personalities, and your inner experience of knowing that you're the I behind it, that you have this.
No, but they would all be the person with the same. They would all have the same ancestor. They could, each of them could legitimately say, "I am a continua."
No, they certainly would say that. But if you're sitting here and now we uploaded, do it with one even, but say 10 to make it more obvious, and you're sitting here and you have your sense, and somebody told me we just uploaded you, would you feel any different? You're sitting here, you wouldn't feel any different. You wouldn't feel any different,
except in the sense that, this is kind of a classic thought experiment. What if you offered me $1 billion if you could kill me, and you give the $1 billion to my new
right?
I actually think it would be quite rational if you could guarantee it, that which you probably can't in real life. Let's say you can guarantee a thought experiment. Right. I would say okay, because I don't think I'm losing anything. It's just like I've moved across the room from one body to another, in effect. I don't think, again, as Parfit said, there's no further fact of my identity. It just is the collection of all these properties that make me who I am. Now, if we diverged, if we'd been living apart for a year or longer, then no, we'd be very different. So.
Yeah, I'm asking just at that precise instant what you're defining as different, because I think you fully answer the question the way I ask it. Maybe I need to ask a different question, but you've answered the question by saying when you've duplicated the 10 others, you hear, I confirm, you've talked to them, but you personally, your I does not feel any difference whatsoever.
No.
And therefore, I would argue that all of those others are very, very close, identical twins of yours, but they're not you. If you die, you die. If you had made $1 billion, had that $1 billion bet, one of your twins really had a very stupid progenitor.
Well, see, I don't see it that way. I think if it's literally microseconds, then we're practically identical. I don't think anything is really being lost, again, because I don't think there's a soul that's unique to each of those individuals. The more they diverge, the more of a problem that would be. I don't think it's really that different than if during my sleep someone came and did some brain damage or a blood vessel blew and it changed, I lost a bunch of memories and personality. Yeah. I think that'd be a lot worse than ending my life and having something absolutely identical to me continuing from that point.
I mean, maybe it would be the same from the standpoint.
Does that not sound like a worship of oneself? I mean, unreal.
Standpoint of the world and the world's worth, that we have, 2 Max Moores now rather than the old one, and these will last longer anyway. So maybe the world is better off because Max is a good person now.
More Moores,
and good. But you, as that inner person, that inner personal I that you feel now would have ceased to exist.
So I think it's extremely counterintuitive. I know it's very hard to say, how could you possibly think that would be okay to do that? But I think it's based on an intuition from our long history of thinking that we are really something other than our bodies, that we actually are a soul or something that exists beyond the collection of these qualities of psychological connectedness. I think it's a very hard intuition to shake, but I really do think that I wouldn't lose anything if I just uploaded and you destroyed the original body. I'm not saying I wouldn't be concerned, because it's very hard to shake that even for myself. I haven't thought about it for a long time, but I think I shouldn't be concerned. It's not a rational concern.
It's not a rational concern, he says. Interesting, very interesting. So we got a super chat over on the Streamlabs. Major thank you to Boneman538 throws in another super chat. Let me pull that up in just here. Boneman throws in $20 and says, reanimated and necromanced are synonyms, yes? Well, let's see. I mean, necromance has to do with essentially the divinization or communication with the dead. But in a way, yes. I mean, it is a sort of magical process. And exactly how are they going to reanimate? Well, as you heard him say, one of their beliefs is that they're going to be able to upload your brain so they can make a clone of you. Or let's say Bill Gates gets cryonically preserved, which he plans to do. And maybe he is dying of old age or something's going out which can't be replaced. Obviously, if he needs a heart transplant or something like that, we have the science to replace these things. But the idea is that they're going to cryonically preserve him to the point where they can map his brain, as he said, which is what he believes to be his personality, his desires, his beliefs, his intentions, his goals. and they'll be able to basically reanimate Bill Gates into, let's say, a 10-year-old Bill Gates or a 20-year-old Bill Gates. Or it could be a robot. It could be a cyborg. It could be an amalgamation of other people's body parts with a robot, with a computer brain, and they'll be able to reanimate him. That does sound in a way like necromancy. That does sound like a sort of divinization with dead bodies, communication with the dead, so to speak. And, you know, and like what exactly I've never heard anybody directly ask them this, but say Bill Gates then comes back. Let's say he's cryonically preserved for, let's say, 20 years. And then he gets brought back. He gets reanimated, as they say. Where was he for those 20 years? Again, I don't believe this is possible myself because of, as he said, the belief in a soul. If you believe in a soul, something that is uncreated, at least by man, well, then there's a special spark, there's a special something within every person that actually cannot be transposed to another being. No matter if you clone 10 Max Moores, those 10 Max Moores aren't exactly Max Moore, but within their worldview, it is. In their worldview, it doesn't matter. Yeah, I think it's techno necromancy. That's a great word for it. And I think Bone Man's right on point here, is that even when you look at science and coming out of the Rosicrucian movement, like there's so many magical elements that undergird this whole scientism and the sort of scientific project, even though most scientists now would no longer believe themselves to be participating in these sort of mystical or magical yearnings. But it's technomancy. I got a book on, it's actually titled Technomancy. But it's a weird, imagine his cryonics lab where you have all these wealthy people, different persuasions. I'm sure many of us, we've never even heard of, but they pay for this expensive project where they go to his Alcor labs in Arizona, and they are cryonically preserved, every one of them, with the intention that in the future, they're going to be able to be re-uploaded or reanimated into a new body. All of them reject the idea of a soul, and they claim, well, the reason why we want to do it is because we love life and we don't want to stop living, and there's so much life to be lived, and there's so many human experiences to have, and we want to be there to enjoy them. And so as we watch, because I mean, we can, if you guys want, we can get into the Natasha Moore interview. It's like, well, the difference between you and me is I love life, and you guys just don't love life as much as I love life, because I love life so much. I don't want to ever die. I want to have an extensive, undetermined end to my life. And once I get bored, or once I decide to, I can self-terminate, or I can just move into a virtual reality, or I can go to a different galaxy, right? Because transhumanism is tied with even some of the yearnings of Elon Musk, and going to Mars and building new terraforming new planets. So that's where Elon Musk is, as much as he's been critical, and we're going to be doing an open panel. I want to do it Monday next week. We're going to do an open panel on Elon Musk and what people think about Elon Musk, because there's talks, and yesterday on X, he basically hinted at the idea that he's going to bring Alex Jones back to X. Okay. He's fighting Disney, he's fighting Google, he's fighting these mass corporations because they're pulling out their ads on X. He's creating free speech platforms, yet he's also doing human trials with Neuralink. And it's like, what exactly is Elon Musk end goal? Because it's not like he's not familiar with this. This ideology comes straight out of Silicon Valley. And I guarantee you, he is very, very familiar with all this stuff. Yeah, it's a trick. Exactly. I think Elon Musk is the ultimate gaslighter. I hope maybe he has a call to consciousness and he becomes more concerned with this stuff. I mean, he's sounding the alarm on artificial intelligence and, artificial general intelligence, what's going on with Chat GPT 5 and that whole thing about Microsoft re-establishing the former CEO. So I don't know. It's very interesting nonetheless. But thank you so much, Bowman, for the $20 super chat. And he also threw in another one here. Let me pull that up. Bowman throws in $5 more, and he says, weird, ironic name for a movie, Selfless. where Ryan Reynolds is overwritten by a wealthy billionaire. The problem I foresee with these is, one, does consciousness transfer intact? And two, do good matches have to be sized and pirated by those stealing? Yeah, I mean, these are questions which, as you saw in his little thought experiment, they don't address head on. But it's really interesting. Like, if, one, like I said, the philosophy of mind, nobody even knows what consciousness is. That's how, for me, just looking into the state of philosophy and the philosophy of mind, like, what framework, what theory of consciousness are you even using? And for them, they're functionalists. So the idea is that it's your brain. They can map your brain, they can map who you are. But for example, well, let me pull it up real quick. I have a whole thing here. Let me pull this up real quick. On X, I found, and this is like a scientific mystery, right? So if their worldview is true, how is it that a man like this, let me see, right here, can exist? The man has no brain. This man is a functional human being who can understand language right now, and yet he literally has a hole in his head. If all you are is your brain, how is this man living, and how can this man even function? He has no brain. He has no brain. That's a scientific mystery for, again, these people who promote this worldview, because it doesn't make any sense. If all you are is your brain, then that man should not be able to think. That man should not be able to hear something. That man should not be able to listen to language and react to it. What exactly is going on? Again, and I'm not saying I know what's going on with that guy either. My point is, it's a scientific mystery that there's multiple instances of people without a brain still being able to function like that dude. So again, I'm not sure. So yeah, people like, I know it's wild. It's definitely wild, but it calls into question their whole premise. So I agree again with Bone Man. And how exactly do the matches have to be seized and pirated by those stealing? Good question. Good question, especially when it comes to cloning, because a lot of the rhetoric is, well, the way we'll do it ethically is we'll just take Bill Gates's DNA and we'll just clone him another body, and then we'll just upload him into that body. What? Well, a lot of them, what they want to do is, again, they want to replace the brain entirely with a basically computer. This would be a very advanced computer, and the computer would do your thinking for you. But again, imagine how that could be hacked. Imagine how that could be programmed. Imagine how that limits your autonomy and your freedom as a person. I think God got it right the first time, right? Because at least right now we can be influenced, but people can't be inside my mind to that degree. So a lot of very serious questions there that I think have yet to be answered. Somebody sent in a super chat here on YouTube. Eric G throws in $2. Thank you so much, my brother. He says, to Musk, if you can't beat them, join them. Well, it almost seems like he's, again, I did a whole video. This was before he acquired X. So I did a video on why Elon Musk is not your friend a long time ago, and talked about how there's so many aspects. And I just played videos of where he would say one thing and then he would say the exact opposite in a very short time period. And so it's like he's always playing both sides. He's always playing. And I think even with maybe the Israel-Gaza thing, we see another instance of that. He says one thing one day, and then he goes and says another thing the next day. He did it with transgenderism. He's done it with AI. I mean, he talks about the problems with artificial intelligence, and then Tesla has one of the other prominent AI systems right now. There's like Google, Microsoft, ChatGPT-4. There's another company that I'm forgetting, and then Tesla. These are like some of the main leaders, at least in our world. I'm sure China has their own, and so on and so forth. So very murky thing. So I totally agree with you. I just don't trust Elon Musk at all. I think he, as I've said before multiple times, X is a platform to map global discourse in relationship to his research with AI, in his utilization of Neuralink and all types of stuff, Starlink. So I think what he's doing is the reason why he wanted to open up free speech, which still isn't total free speech because it's freedom of speech, not freedom of reach, right? So they just allocate you to a sort of echo chamber and that nobody can actually engage with you. But yeah, you can say whatever you want. No, just nobody sees it. I don't know. And that's not to say that X hasn't been beneficial for political and global discourse. I think it has, but I'm questioning his motives to some degree. So thank you so much, Eric G. Really appreciate that. Again, if anybody wants to show some love, send in a super chat. Blue Skittle throws in another one over on the Dono chat and says, Bill Gates' liver be like, shit, here we go again. Yeah, I'm sure. Probably also the children from Epstein's Island would probably think the same thing too. Okay, so let's get to our last video here, and then we're going to wrap it up, guys. Please send in any super chats or support you'd like to show, any questions. Can we get some COTEL crew members? Anybody, get yourself a membership. Help out the channel. Send in some YouTube super chats. I want to go now over to this conversation with Natasha Vita-More, and this is one of these roundtables. It's called the Nexus Institute. And they have a bunch of these where they'll bring like philosophers or scholars from all different parts of the world in different fields. And like one of the guys here is a student, and he asked a question that, isn't the most well-worded or most erudite question, but you can see where Natasha actually gets a little bit frustrated with him. So let's watch this video and we'll conclude the stream with this one. But, all right, it's Humanism and Transhumanism featuring Natasha Vita-More. This is Max Moore's wife and another very, very prominent advocate for transhumanism.
I'm interested because we just talked about this extremely popular book of Harari, Homo Deus. As I have you here, Natasha, and I have a theologian like Miroslav, I'm interested to see what, according to the two of you, is the difference between the God-man, Jesus Christ, and the man-God, which apparently, according to Harari and a few others, we can create through our technological things, and which is one of the reasons why, and maybe you can start with that, Natasha, you are also literally in the business of suspending life, and with the idea that at a certain moment, technology will be on that level that people can live much longer or even forever. And the question then related to this, what's the connection between our mortality and our morality?
I don't use the term immortality because I think it's a misnomer. I think it's heavily sequestered to the myths of the early proto-scientists, the Taoists. And it's also, think about Sartre, no exit, you can't get out. It's, you're stuck there forever. So I think of immortality is not only a pipe dream, but it's an impossibility. Our solar system has a lifespan, our sun has a lifespan. So alternatively, I think about a limited lifespan for a person to live as long as he or she desires or is capable. And if not, then cryonics is an alternative until later medicine can catch up with the disease. But looking at this post-human era, I don't think we're there yet. I think that has been subscribed to us by the academics in postmodernism. And I think they reached out for the post-humanist era because they had no sensibility within academics and in the mainstream about technology.
Yeah, so she's making a point that I didn't explicitly highlight before, is that most scholars in the transhumanist movement are not in favor of postmodernism. As you can hear her, you can hear the tone of her voice. They're not very happy with it because they feel, again, it lacks progress. Postmodernism in its pure relativism lacks the necessity for an existential pursuit for these technologies, if you will. You see, so yeah. So most transhumanists, even though you could say there's aspects of postmodern worldview, like they don't have a strong metaphysical framework. They are not postmodernists. They actually dislike postmodernist academics.
and the advances in artificial intelligence, artificial general intelligence, nanomedicine, nanotechnology, CRISPR, like with genetic engineering or gene therapy, et cetera, at all. So I think there was this leap. I think we're in the transhuman era, where the transhumanist era is about a human in transition to becoming something other. Now, what is that other? That could be an evolved human. It could be a human merging with artificial intelligence. It could be a human that, in my view, would become more humane. So that's how I look at it in that regard. So immortality, no. Limited lifespan, yes. Redefining death, we've been doing that for eons, determining when someone dies and then we find out, oh, we could have cured that. We used to hold a mirror up to someone's nose, listen to their heart. We can, bring people back to life that 100, 200 years ago, even 50 years ago, were considered dead. So that transition to becoming a post-human, but not non-biological, not some avatar, some automata out there, but a human that's in the stage of post-biological, meaning not having a shelf life, not limited by our genetic makeup.
Right. So, but if I understand this correctly, you and your husband Max, in where you live, Scottsdale, Arizona, you have this car center where, in my lay language, you freeze bodies.
Oh, okay. It's called Alcor Life Extension Foundation. My husband is CEO. I'm a member, but I don't run there. I'm an academic. I teach, etc. But I did do a scientific breakthrough there where I proved that 2 neurons in a simple animal withstand vitrification rather than freezing. Freezing is a misnomer. It's the wrong term. It's vitrification because you don't want crystallization of the cells, which will crack and so vitrification is the methodology that's used now in cryonics for suspension. My scientific research, the scientist part of me, proved that long-term memory does exist in simple animals after cryopreservation or vitrification. It's a growing business. People will opt for it. Doctors are more interested in it now than ever. We just suspended our beloved animal companion, who is like my son. He died of old age. But the thing about cryonics, it picks up where today's medicine leaves off. It's not some science fiction dream. It's based on evidence-based science. It works. We brought back C. elegans, and that is a fact. So it's not whirly-hurly science fiction.
But just for my own imagination, there's it's a center. And the bodies there are no longer alive, but they're also not dead.
Yeah, and that's another one of the problems with today's FDA and all the rules and regulations. You have to physically die before the team, the suspension team, which is on standby, takes you for the surgery. But we've seen people who are pronounced dead come back to life with, beating of the heart, with using different medical equipment to bring them back. So that doesn't bother me so much. But the facility, Alcor, is a large facility, has several operating rooms. It has doers there. It has neuroscientists there. It has neurosurgeons there. It's a highly reputable company, and some of our leading thought leaders globally are signed up for cryonics because it is the best safety net for those who want to live a longer life.
Yeah, and because then at a certain moment when the technology is there, they can get out of this, and then wonderful things happen. In your Transhumanist reader, you write, Transhumanism is a non-religious philosophy of life that rejects faith, worship, and emphasizes a meaningful approval to living informed by reason and science and progress. What do you mean?
I think that that can be taken in 2 different ways. Number one, it could be taken that it's agnostic or atheistic, and that any type of faith is verboten. But I don't agree with that at all. I have very strong faith in spirituality. I've always been a spiritual person. I was born Episcopalian, a Christian. I went through confirmation. And as a teenager in my early life and through teenager and all through my life, I've donated more of my time helping others and volunteering for causes around the world than I have in making money. So it's, you know, it's like you're bad if you don't believe in God. I'm not religious, and nor do I believe in God. But that doesn't make me an evil person
No.
because I've volunteered most of my life in saving other people's lives.
Right. No, you know, fair enough. But listen, and I'm interested by the fact that you have this faith in reason, science, and progress being the fundament of our culture. You know, to create a better society.
I think we need a better society. At the first round table, we went over good and evil and took a look at some of the problems around the world, and we heard incredible narratives about people overcoming odds and how are we going to deal with this and what is it and what does it mean. But the bottom line, in my view, is that the human mind, the introspection, the creativity, the ability to explore, discover new planets, no one discovered America, it was already here, but let's say Columbus, so to speak, discovered America, which he did not. But it's, we are explorers as a species, as Homo sapiens sapiens. And we have the ability now, through the use of ethical technology and evidence-based science, to carve what I consider a more apt, a more intelligent, a more ethical, a more humane society. And that's the whole reason behind transhumanism. Yes, it is to extend life, to be sure, but not as we are, not as the humans that we are with our reptilian brain and our fight or flight instinct that brings about the first panel, the greed, the money making. But I agree with that. Amazon is fine. It's not a bad guy. So, you know, come on.
May I ask how much does it cost to actually free someone?
Yeah, when I signed up in 1990, it cost $40,000, and it's vitrification. So
now I believe it's in the six figures. So if you're going to be cryonically preserved, I'm pretty sure it's well over $100,000 it takes. But Pims, thank you so much, brother, for the $10 super chat. He says, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" Yeah, I get your point for sure. And so, you know, it's ironic, but she is very explicit about her hopes. And I think she mentions it in this conversation that she hopes to get a more youthful body. And so she expects that she's going to be able to be transported, her brain activity, into whether it be a sort of robotic or another clone of some sort. And this is why she's in favor of cryon. It might be right here as she describes it. But notice how she says, well, when I did it back in 1990, it was $40,000. Yeah, that was a lot back in 19. That is one person's like salary that they could live off of easily in 1990. It's well into the six figures now.
So I am a neuro because I want a different body. I think that whole body prosthetics is sensible. We've seen that great advances in robotics and narrow AI and haptic systems and interfacing with neurology to form robotic limbs for people who have gone to war and suffered and been injured. They now have prosthetic legs and arms, etc. So I think that we'll be designing new bodies. I think it's going to be a major field in design and building innovation. So $40,000 when I was, well, when I was in the 1990s back then, but now it's more, but you know, things cost. But you get a life insurance policy, and I pay what, $100 a month in life insurance.
Well, rich people had been trying to live forever for a very long time, and I think giving them
this is the student that they brought to the round table. Again, I think he could have expressed himself more eloquently in regards to asking those questions, but I'll play it for you because she gets a little fiery after the end of this.
This kind of technology is going to be extremely dangerous.
But why do you think it's rich people?
Because,
I wasn't rich, and I'm not rich.
I don't have $40,000.
Oh, well, listen, I didn't either. I got a life insurance policy.
And that was back in the 90s. Now, I don't know how much does it cost. I actually got admitted to Columbia University, but I didn't have the money to actually pay for my college. I didn't get a scholarship. So I'm currently, or I used to actually work in DHL. I just carry boxes. So when I look at how some people are, you know, spending their money or the way they plan for their lives, everyone got a free choice, everything. It's their own hard-earned money. But I think there's a lot more important and very urgent problems that the world should look at. And the very first example should be starvation. When we think about, solving the future
But don't you
problems and
think that
everything.
transhumanism has considered that? I just got through saying I spent most of my life volunteering and helping others,
Of
including
course.
working for the Home for Incurables,
course.
feeding people on the street. So don't put words in my mouth,
No,
sir.
no.
I think it's important. I think it's important.
Whoa. He was just trying to make a point about the differences in economic status and opportunities in society, but we'll continue.
That we step back and consider what the larger problem is here. And I think the larger problem is what should be our attitude towards human limits, towards human finitude. Now, there are some people who despise limits and live to transgress them. And there are other people who respect limits because they view them as not just an obstacle to certain aspirations, but as actually constitutive of the meaning of our lives. And I think that the most obvious case of a human limit without which human life would have no meaning, at least by my pre-transhumanist lights, is time. The idea of living forever seems like hell on earth to me.
I agree.
And not only because some of the people I know might live as long as I do. It's not just for that reason. But I think that there is a sense in which the urgency of our values and of moral values, of our aesthetic experiences, of our religious experiences, the urgency of all this is premised on the limitation of time. And I think it's very important, before we learn to be post-human or transhuman, I think we have to learn to be human. And so I am very suspicious of the transhumanist enterprise. Firstly,
major shout out to Frankie D for his super chat. Frankie D throws in $4.99. Thank you so much, brother. He says, why want a new body? Aren't you beautiful as you are? Don't you have value for your intellect? These people speak out of both sides of their mouth. Well, she wants to live indefinitely. Again, she's made this. I've watched a lot of her videos. She is very specific in the fact that she wants to live indefinitely and basically for thousands of years if possible. And she's going to get to a point that she just loves life more than other people because other people are willing to die and she won't die because she loves life so much. But yeah, so the reason why she wants a new body is because she is limited by the biological constraints of the body she's in right now. That's why she's in favor of uploading to a new body or cloning and then being moved or transported, reanimated and transported to the clone body. But yeah. So thank you so much, Frankie D. God bless you, brother, for the $4.99 super chat. Really appreciate you.
Because it's conceived and enacted by humans. And somebody has to make the judgments.
There you
The
said
judgments, we will never transcend that kind of finitude. Transhumanism is another human project. I'll just stop with this now. We talked about this last night. There was a 17th century Jewish philosopher who lived in Prague. And he once wrote in an essay, he began his observation. He said that the human being is a being that aspires to perfection. It's a very standard medieval formulation. But then he did something so wicked and smart. He turned the screw in again and he said, and in a being that is defined by the aspiration to perfection, perfection itself would have to be regarded as a flaw and a shortcoming.
I agree.
And that if we don't learn to live with that, then I don't see anything but destruction.
Yeah, I think I want to echo what has just been said. I'm very ambivalent about the idea of not just post-humanism, but transhumanism as well. I kind of think that it's beautiful to be human and kind of discovering the beauty of what it means to be human. So whatever we want to do in terms of extension of life, whatever we want to do in terms of curing the ills that befall humanity, and God knows much suffering is inflicted upon human beings by illness, by all sorts of other, in all sorts of other ways. But it would seem to me that nonetheless, the beauty of our humanity ought to be preserved. And I think the great challenge before us is to say, why is it important for us to be human, to remain human? And I think you mentioned, and I think that was in your question as well, that somehow science should help us answer this question. And I have difficulty with that. I think science is an incredibly important, marvelous tool. I think technology is absolutely marvelous. Well, science, not just tool, but also explaining reality to us. Technology enhancing various aspects of our lives. It's absolutely fantastic. But one thing it cannot do, it cannot tell me what ought to be. It cannot tell me what I ought to want. I want something, what I desire something, but what is worth desiring? What kind of human being is worth being? That question, I think, is a fundamental to the nature of our humanity.
Then you all don't understand the philosophy of transhumanism, because the main core tenet is more humanity, more humaneness.
But let's formulate the question differently. The question would then be, what am I being frozen for?
Well,
The minute you ask that question,
you're using the wrong term.
what am I
It's
being
not
vitrified?
frozen.
What am I being X'd for? Whatever you do. But, but
so
those,
say
wait
you-
1 second, but that assessment of goals and purposes returns us to the traditional humanist ways of reasoning with all their strengths and weaknesses.
Do you like life?
I generally do, yeah.
Okay. Well, if you love life, if you like life, and if you love life, do you want to stop it? Do you want to end it?
Well, I love chocolate and I don't want to eat it all the time.
Well, you don't
I
want
do.
life all the time.
Well, you don't want life all the time. So I guess you're screwed, bub. You're not going to get it. But oh boy, I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. We got one more super chat. Amelia A. Strauss throws in another super chat. Thank you so much, Amelia. Let me pull this one up real quick. And it is a $20 super chat. Thank you so much. And she says, what's your opinion about the soul? When does the soul leave the body? When does life start? So obviously, I'm coming at this question as an Orthodox Christian, and we typically understand it is, and Father Deacon Dr. Ananias would be a much more eloquent in elaborating how exactly this plays out. But there's an Aristotelian philosophy called hylomorphism, and it's that the soul actually gives form to the body. And so a lion's soul, if you will, like anima was tied with soul. Now that soul is not the same thing as ours being made in the image of God, right? But that's what gives form to the lion in all animals and stuff like that, generally speaking. But for humanity, it's our soul that gives form to us and gives us the capacity for these higher activities. So when does life start? Well, Christianity, generally speaking, and Orthodoxy would say at conception. As soon as that embryo has been sparked with life, we believe in a mystery. And we get this from the Annunciation, the idea that the Holy Spirit, again, through the willingness of the Theotokos, was impregnated by God, and the womb, her womb, gave birth to Christ's humanity, that he was human in the womb, right? He wasn't human and once he was born, as some of the sort of late term abortionists want to argue. When does the soul leave the body? Well, that's a debated topic. At least how we understand it in Orthodoxy is that at some point after the body's died, the soul is released, and there's a sort of temporary judgment. There's an initial judgment, and then the soul is at the end of time. So when Christ comes back, when the end of the world ends, that is when the final judgment occurs. And in a way, everybody who's already passed has already gone through a sort of initial judgment, a temporary judgment, and then they are waiting at the final judgment. And so it's kind of a mind bender. It's a bit psychedelic. But you and I, we are in space-time moving towards the future. Christ, the Alpha and the Omega at the end, is already at the end point. And so in a way, everybody whose soul has been released from their bodies, they are at that end point, in a way, waiting for the historical time frame to catch up to that point, if that makes sense. It's very sort of psychedelic, and multidimensional, but that would be, I do not know the specifics on what the tradition is on hours or days in which the soul leaves the body. I'm not specific on that, but my point is we understand it's the soul which gives the noetic faculties to us. So it's your soul, it's the nous, right? So our anthropology isn't mind, body, soul. It is body, soul, nous being the eye of the heart or the eye of the soul. It is your noetic faculties come from your soul. And then in a form of hylomorphism, it's the soul that gives form to the body. So the soul is the integral part of our anthropology and who we are. And these higher faculties, your imagination, this is tied with your nous. This is tied with your soul. And this is why we believe that the more you sin, the more you engage in darkness, the more detritus, dirt, filth sort of encaptures your soul, and your mind itself becomes darker and darker and darker. And we would say this is indicative, or I would say, of the archetype of the evil genius. The evil genius, yes, he's very rational. Yes, he's very smart. Yes, he has a high IQ, but his lack of empathy, his lack of the pursuit of love and truth and mercy and compassion and honor and grace, he is not interested in these things. And he has darkened himself further and further and further, where only he's interested in his own self-preservation and his own acquisition of his desires and goals. And so I think transhumanism has, in a way, of sort of familiarity with that evil genius archetype and the rejection of the soul. Again, that's why the whole anthropology of the transhumanist project, I don't think is compatible. And I don't think they're going to be able to accomplish their goals at all. So I hope that helped, Amelia, in regards to when specifically does the soul leave the body. I'm not sure on that. But the soul does leave the body after death. It goes through an initial judgment, and then it is waiting, as with everybody else that has died, at the final judgment outside space and time, because when Christ comes, that's the ending of space and time, if that helps. So she says it does. Well, thank you so much, Amelia A. Strauss, for the super chat. Thank you so much for your support tonight. Really appreciate you. And we had one more super chat come in from Struggling at Home, throws in $5 and says, it puts the chocolate in the mouth or it gets the chiropractic. That's hilarious, bro. I love the Silence of the Lambs reference there. Very, very good. Yeah, so I'm sure we'd have some differences with the Jewish scholar there in regards to different things, but I think he made a good point in regards to humanness and the idea that human or perfection itself is actually the goal of most people in various aspects, but it as a final destination would seem to be unattainable. And I think that's part of the fall, right? Because if you're taking an Orthodox framework and you are a Christian, well, we aren't in a state of perfection, and perfection can never be attained on this side of creation. You see? So I think there's some real limits there. And the idea that you're going to be able to extend your life indefinitely, that you're going to be able to, get a new body, get a robotic form, various forms of life extension, nanotechnology, a computer brain. I just think this project is doomed to fail because it doesn't account for the soul, and there is no there to what a person is. So thank you so much, Struggling at Home, for that. I really appreciate you. And then we had another super chat coming from our friend Frankie D. Throws in another one. Shout out to Frankie D. He throws in $10 and says, bro, can we clearly see her defensive posture and loss of self-control as a reflection of her mind? Absolutely. Absolutely. And this wasn't even a scholar. This was like one of the college students that they invite to these roundtable forums. She is afraid of death. If she spent as much effort on living an Orthodox life for Christ as she did on living forever, she would not be afraid of death. I agree. And then I totally agree with you, brother. And I think what their responses would be what she said at the end. Do you like life, Frankie D? Well, I like life, and I love life, and I love life so much that I want more life, and I want to live as long as I can and as long as I decide to. And once I decide that I'm no longer in love with life, well, then I'll end my life. And there's no reason why that shouldn't be a possibility. So, yeah, I think, they would argue that it has nothing to do with our morality why we're afraid of death. We're not afraid of death. We just think that death can be alleviated through the utilization of science and technology. But I totally agree with you. I think really the impetus of most of these people, and they're all going to be of a particular framework in regards to their worldview, is that it really is a sort of moral angst in regards to Judgment Day. And what if they are wrong, right? Because for them, there is no possibility they are wrong. And maybe we're wrong. Now, again, obviously we have faith. Obviously we're Christians. We don't believe we're wrong either. But even if we are wrong, at least we lived our life morally. And by living your life morally, I think that's the best thing you can do for other people, because that's what creates a harmonious society. And that is what perpetuates better well-being for everybody else, not David Pierce's negative utilitarianism where we're going to reprogram nature so predator species no longer eat each other. What? Dude, that is not humility. That is not morality. That is some weird dude. And maybe we'll do another stream on David Pierce. That's just some weird guy that thinks he has a godlike complex where they're going to reprogram the entire planet to the way that they see fit. Maybe predation's actually a good thing. Maybe eating meat's actually a good thing, David Pierce, as most research would show in regards to his veganism. Not exactly really good for a long life. So these people are deluded. They're living in their own world. And so I agree with you, Frankie D. I think you made a great comment there. And thank you so much, brother, for the $10 super chat. And I want to thank everybody for the super chats. We're going to hop off here. Smash that like. I want to thank Blue Skittle. Thank you, Kristen. Major thank you to Frankie D, Struggling at Home, Amelia A. Strauss, and definitely a major thank you to Bone Man 538. God bless you, brother. I wish you nothing but the best. Thank you for all your support. And shout out to Pim Orsovs and Eric G for the support. Really, really appreciate it, guys. I will be back Monday with an open panel, and I'll be premiering my conversation with BLA yesterday on the book, The Master and Margarita. That will premiere tomorrow. And then I'm going to play the last section of the stream I just did with Rachel Wilson on Dweebs on the Internet, Peter Zion and James Lindsay, where I'm going to just focus on the last section with James Lindsay's beef with the orthosphere. And I'm going to premiere that Sunday. So we'll have 2 premieres tomorrow and Sunday, and then we'll be back Monday night with an open panel, topic being Elon Musk. So if you guys got opinions on Elon Musk, make sure to join for Monday night, and we'll be hosting that open panel. So really appreciate you guys. Thank you for all the supporters. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you very, very much for allowing me to do what I do. And I will see you guys until next time. As always, God bless.